Welcome to episode 2 of How's Your Walnut? We're talking about your prostate and the similarities between it and a walnut. Bryce Wylde is with me once again, and this episode is called Feeding Your Walnut.
Turns out, Kev, actually walnuts are good for your walnut.
I was going to ask you that because we're talking about feeding your walnut. What would walnuts themselves do for your prostate?
So walnuts contain some of the richest amounts of omega-3 fatty acids that are good for you, omega-3s, 6s, and some 9s. Turns out they're also incredible for the brain and the heart. When we acknowledge good nutrition for the brain and the heart, we're, of course, feeding and supporting a healthy walnut or the prostate as well. But it would be those omega-3s primarily that are found in walnuts that are good for the walnut. Of course, the focus being all about size, right? Maintaining good, healthy size, not just preventing.
We talked about that in episode 1. Size matters when it comes to your prostate.
Yeah. So,
but isn't size matters the other way around, though? You want it smaller,
you do.
Not bigger.
You do. You want it small. You want it normal size, right? So too small, of course, is other problems, prostate atrophy, which is a rare thing. But nonetheless, making sure that your walnut is healthy. Now, after the age of about puberty, it starts to grow. And we talked about it growing disproportionately in size after the age of 50 in a good 60% of us males. That goes up exponentially as we age. But keeping it in a nice shape and size is the name of the game. So, of course, size does matter. Now, when we're talking about prostatitis, that's an inflammation of the prostate gland due often to bacteria. There's other forms of prostatitis. And then there's prostate cancer. But our focus is really the size as it relates to benign, non-cancerous enlargement. And diet can help us out so much here, okay?
Just before we get to the healthy diet, we eat a lot of sugars, we eat a lot of trans fats, a lot of fats, a lot of bad food.
Yeah.
What's that doing?
All right, well, there's a couple of things. So what we want to do is we want to avoid too much of the highly refined sugars in our diet, because ultimately sugar, or refined sugar, let's call it, because there are grains out there. There's black rice, there's quinoa, there's cassia, there's all kinds of non-floured or pulverized, refined grains that are otherwise healthy in your diet, a good high fiber diet. But what sugar, too much sugar, is doing is causing insulin insensitivity. So we talked about in the first segment how testosterone converting to dihydrotestosterone, or DHT, is going to feed the prostate. Sugar, which causes insulin spiking, we're not talking about diabetes here yet, but a large percentage of North America is actually pre-diabetic. They're on that verge of diabetes, causes insulin to spike, and that happens so often in a diet high in sugar that insulin goes to sleep, becomes insensitive. When that's the case, insulin, being insensitive, leaves sugar around in the bloodstream. That ultimately actually causes an enlargement of the prostate. There's a couple of types of hormones in the body that we care about as it relates to the prostate. DHT, as I mentioned already, and insulin. Insulin insensitivity and sugar being high in the bloodstream, that is a disaster for the prostate. It causes the prostate to grow. So a diet that's ultimately going to control for blood sugar is key. This starts with a wide variety of brightly colored fruits and vegetables. So the first tip is eat a rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple every single day. But it turns out that the green and the red are actually the most important.
Okay.
So lycopene. There's a watermelon for you. There's some pomegranate. This is when we cut it in half, very brightly red ruby grapefruit. Tomatoes, particularly tomato paste. What's the common denominator here in all this red? Lycopene. Lycopene is so prostate healthy. Now, not only for the size of it and protecting it against oxidative stress and helping manage the sugar we talked about and inflammation and so forth, but also actually studies show toward prevention of prostate cancer. We said we wouldn't talk too much about that, but this is the one time I want to talk about prostate cancer and prevention. Lycopene. Get this high in your diet to help stave off prostate cancer.
Ketchup?
So ketchup is another version, a little bit too much sugar in the ketchup, Kev,
I was hoping, folks, I really, really was.
But taking these tomatoes and actually concentrating them into a low-sugar ketchup or tomato paste is where you're going to win.
I made a homemade ketchup sugar-free, and I enjoyed it. However, my kids hated it. We have been conditioned in the West to only like foods that are high in sugar and salt. And it's amazing. I stopped eating a lot of salt years ago, and it's amazing what happens when you go to a restaurant, especially in the U.S., and you taste foods that have full salt in them.
Hits you like a Mack truck.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. So it must be the same with sugar. So if
Flavor distortion is huge. It is the same with sugar. I'm a proponent of salt. I think that actually, we demonize salt more than we probably should. And I mean, there's a lot of controversy. It's actually upcoming within the world of nutrition, how this may contribute or not to cardiovascular disease, hypertension most in particular. But salt aside, the real demon is sugar, as it relates to the prostate, for sure.
And I've learned that dates are a wonderful way of getting sweetness into your recipes and your food. And
high fiber as well, high soluble fiber, which, by the way, is another tip to keeping a healthy prostate. Most of us think about fiber as it relates to having a good bowel movement. Well, it turns out soluble fiber, which is very heart healthy. Again, when you think about heart health and brain health, those two, you're also going to be getting prostate health. So here's another one you might not have heard about, though. Actually, before I bring that up, let me bring up some simple stuff. You know what these are?
Well, they're Brazil nuts.
Yeah. Brazil nuts are,
raw Brazil nuts.
4 of these a day. 4 of these a day for their selenium content. Selenium is incredibly helpful. It's called the protection of antioxidants that come from superoxide dismutase. Again, we don't have to remember this.
Yes.
But supporting SOD, or superoxide dismutase, is very, very protective for the prostate. There's another one here, another nut that you recognize, or a seed, rather.
The pumpkin seeds, which I use a lot of. I leave these on. I have jars on my counter where I have pumpkin seeds, and I'll just throw them in things.
Into your oatmeal in the morning, into a shake, blend them up. You can even have it as pumpkin seed butter, as opposed to other nut butters like almond butter or peanut butter. And it's really for the zinc concentration. The concentration of zinc in your in a small fistful of pumpkin seeds is phenomenal. The other group, there's an onion and garlic.
I love onions and garlic.
These two come from the allium family, Allium cepa. This family here is super potent. Not only are they antibacterial, they give us what are called sulfur compounds. Also incredibly potent to prevent prostate problems, hyperplasia, growing of your walnut, as well as potentially even prostatitis, which is, again, that inflammation and infection of the prostate. Lastly, as it relates to food groupings, we've got pistachios here, we've got an avocado, and we've got very dark chocolate, and it really does have to be at least 80% or higher. These are called phytosterols. Now, this is a grouping. It sounds like sterolins or some kind of steroids. Nothing to do with steroids. All these are naturally occurring from plant immune balancers, right? And they are kind of like cholesterol found in plant, but healthy types of cholesterol. That studies show, good evidence, scientific evidence shows that it helps to manage the shape and the size of your prostate. So we're talking about keeping a good sized walnut, one that does not enlarge prematurely. Kev, we talk a lot about treatment, right? Nutrition is prevention. And we're talking a lot about drugs that can actually shrink the prostate, but getting at it early is going to help to prevent it from growing in the first place.
You literally are what you eat.
You are.
People need to realize that all of this, the cells, everything in our body, are whatever we put into our body, nothing else.
Yep. Now, we talked in the first segment about types of drugs that are available on the market once your doctor says, your prostate's enlarged, finasteride, and these types of drugs that actually work on that 5-alpha reductase, conversion into DHT. I said I wouldn't mention again, but I'm mentioning it in context. The idea in this case, though, is that those drugs will work very quickly to increase flow, right? That'll actually help shrink the prostate and increase flow. Foods are not going to work overnight. Foods are not going to work within a matter of days or even weeks. This takes months. But to your point, once you start feeding your prostate, giving your walnut the nutrients that it needs, it will on its own shrink down to a normal size because of these ingredients. You will get back to the point where you're having regular urinary flow. And we're going to wait for this, but at the end, we'll talk to you about this in the fourth segment, a natural medicine that besides diet that comes from saw palmetto. It's got to be a certain type, though, will actually also, in and of itself, I'll share some studies that will shrink the prostate. We talked about omega-3s from walnuts. You can actually test yourself at home. This is the work of Dr. Bill Harris. a finger stick test. You can look at your omega-3 status. You want to be 8% or higher for good overall prostate, heart, and brain health. You can even check, and this is the last one I'll mention, vitamin D. Vitamin D status is huge. This is the sunshine vitamin.
Yeah.
I mean, without it, our prostate enlarges. So good studies show that 70% or more of folks that have BPH, benign prostate hyperplasia, have vitamin D deficiency. It's a very strong correlation.
Especially in the winter.
Well, that correlation of the vitamin D deficiency goes way up. Where we live here, where we're recording from, north of 40 degrees, we're all low. We're all deficient. And that's where the power of self-testing comes in. Test yourself at home to know where your status is at, or ask your doctor to run a blood work.
Water is good for everything. Is it good for your prostate?
Keeping hydrated is very important. So a lot of folks that have BPH, they come to learn, especially before going to bed at night, like restrict the water. And they go throughout the day because it's an uncomfortable feeling, this hesitancy, this incomplete voiding, this like retention of urination. Because again, the prostate, the walnut, is strangling the urethra and it's not allowing for good flow. So folks that have BPH diagnosed, they avoid water and they shouldn't be. Keeping hydrated is very important. We'll talk about that next in terms of exercise and how to get rid of the residual amount of urine that might be stuck in your bladder. But you're right, first and foremost, drinking water is very important, keeping well hydrated to have regular urinary flow.
All right, and that is episode 3 where we're exercising and resting your walnut.